in there, you talk about how play isn't just fun. It's not just it's just for fun. And if you're a parent listening to this right now, or you're just an adult, knowing that it rewires your child's brain in some way for resilience, and also helps you as an adult regulate stress and support your emotional health.
Yeah, it's incredible. One of the things that, and you and I have nerded out together for a long time, a couple of decades on the science of interpersonal neurobiology, is that threat states in our nervous system and play states in our nervous system are incompatible with each other. And so when we play, it actually gives us tons of cues of safety, even subcortically, deep in our brain and in our sensory and our nervous system. So yes, it helps as adults. It helps us release stress. I love telling a story. My kids give me permission to tell the story because they say that I sound ridiculous and not them. But I was playing Yahtzee with my boys. They were probably 12, 9, and 6 or something. We were playing Yahtzee and they started fighting with each other and it started getting really unpleasant for me. So instead of setting the boundary and saying, boys, if you're fighting, it's not fun for me and I don't want to do this anymore. And eventually I end up yelling and throwing the dice across the room. And I did not yell Yahtzee. I yelled something else. Now, that sounds terrible, but it's not. Here's why. Because my kids also know that I'm going to come make it right with them very soon. So it actually builds relational resilience as long as I make repair, as long as we're not talking about abuse, right?
I'm Dr. Elisha Goldstein, and this is Emotional Longevity. My guest today is Dr. Payne Bryson. Tina is a psychotherapist, author, and one of the world's leading experts on child development and parenting. You may know her as the co-author of The Whole Brain Child, No Drama Discipline, and The Power of Showing Up, all written alongside Dr. Dan Siegel. Her work translates cutting-edge neuroscience into practical, everyday tools for fostering emotional resilience in kids and in parents, and really just helping people in general. Her latest book, The Way of Play, is about something many of us as adults may have lost touch with, and that's really the act of play. But as Tina explains, play isn't just about having fun. It's fundamental to our emotion regulation. This is why we're working with this on this podcast, and also our connection and even lifelong resilience. She reveals why play is a powerful tool for shaping the brain, how parents can use it to deepen relationships with themselves and their children, and why adults need play just as much as kids do. In this episode, we talk about the neuroscience of play, how it builds stress resilience, and why it's one of the most overlooked tools for emotional health. We explore how small shifts in daily interactions can transform family dynamics, what repair looks like after emotional ruptures, and what it has to do with emotional longevity, and even how play can enhance adult relationships. Tina brings a wealth of insight, experience, and practical wisdom, and I know you're going to take away something meaningful from this conversation. We both get personal in here with a number of experiences from our lives as well. And now my conversation with Dr. Payne Bryson. Okay, Tina, welcome to the Emotional Longevity Podcast.
I am so happy to be here. I love the name of your podcast. I've been listening to some of the episodes. It's really great stuff. So I'm honored to be here.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that too. I have a history of loving play, the science of play. So I'm really excited about your book that you've brought out. And in there, you talk about how play isn't just fun. It's just for fun. And if you're a parent listening to this right now, or you're just an adult, knowing that it rewires your child's brain in some way for resilience, and also helps you as an adult regulate stress and support your emotional health. Can you jump into that and explain why maybe parents need play just as much as kids do?
Yeah, it's incredible. One of the things that, and you and I have nerded out together for a long time, a couple of decades on the science of interpersonal neurobiology. So we're going to have some fun here.
Yeah.
Jaak Panksepp's beautiful work. He's known as the rat tickler, and he studied rats and their play. And so one of the things that both from his work and of course Stephen Porges's and many other people's work that we have come to know is that threat states in our nervous system and play states in our nervous system are incompatible with each other. And so when we play, it only can happen when we're not in a threat state. And so when we play, it actually gives us tons of cues of safety, even subcortically, deep in our brain and in our sensory and our nervous system. So yes, it helps as adults. It helps us release stress. It helps us kind of activate a felt sense of safety and creativity. And, in the book, The Yes Brain, that I wrote with Dan Siegel, we talk about how the brain is kind of either in a reactive state or in a receptive state. So it helps us cultivate receptivity and regulation. But I think, if you're a parent, one of the things that is the most rewarding thing ever is when your kid delights in you and you feel like you're doing a good job and you have this kind of synchrony that's happening. And so when that happens in play, it's incredibly rewarding for us. And when we find that mutual delight, that's kind of one of the essences of secure attachment. And so it's extreme. It can be extremely pleasurable. Although I will say this, Elisha, and that is that one of the reasons that Georgie and I wrote this book, and Georgie's a seasoned play therapist, is because so many parents think of play, like you said, as just a way to pass the time, or it's just like something you have to do because your kid wants you to. And I've experienced this too, it can be really, really boring to play the way your kids want them. It's like, if I have to smash these.
If your play is not my play, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I really want to be like, putting the dishes away and organizing this drawer or whatever. But no, I got to smash these two super guys together. Or parents want to do it, but don't know how. They're like, okay, so I'm on the floor, then what? So I think, it's really important that we access play states. And I'll just say one other thing about that for ourselves as grownups is that, one of the best gifts we can give our kids is for us to have adult playmates, because, there's a lot happening in the world right now. You and I are both in LA. We both have things happening with our families, etc. When things happen, my kids know that they do not have to hold the whole of my distress, because they know I've got my friends, And so I think one of the things we need to do, besides just playing with our kids, which I hope we get to talk more about, is that we have playmates and friends that we still are having fun and delighting with as well.
Speaking of that, and then we'll get to the, playing with our kids and what that looks like. In my experience, when I talk to adults about play, there's sometimes like drawing a blank in some way. And so how do you get adults to understand, because parents, if it's going to start with the parent, like, okay, so what your kids, they play in different ways, but as adults, we've almost forgotten what that's like. And people pay, I always say, people pay a lot of money to go away somewhere to play.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but we can play in our everyday lives, but how do we uncover what that means to us as adults so that we can then translate it with our kids?
And you're right. Our brains have changed. It's different. For children, it's when we were all children, it's really our first language. And it is, it's so much how we operate in the world. But as adults, our brains are different and we hold so much mental load, and we're thinking of, we have so much responsibility. So a couple of things is we want to first expand our concept of what play is, right? So play is what you delight in. So it's really fun for the sake of fun, with not necessarily with a purpose in mind, right? Now there's structured play, like a lot of people are into pickleball, right? So that's play, but it's structured.
A lot of people are into pickleball.
Yeah, it's structured and there are rules and stuff. So that's super fun. That totally counts as play. But I think, my kids are now 18, 21, and 24. My eldest is a senior in high school, and he's got, moot court 2 nights a week. On those 2 nights a week, when I know he's not going to be home for dinner, we meet friends at a little hole in the wall Mexican food place. Sometimes we have margaritas, and we're just sitting down and we're laughing and we're telling stories and whatever. And that is totally play. It's the highlight of my week. I look forward to it. And because it's fun and I delight in it, it totally counts as play, even though I'm eating a meal and we're catching up. So I think one of the things I would like to encourage people to do, and if you think back, Elisha, about the way you played when you were little, I imagine that a lot of the ways you play are very much reflective of who you are now, right? Like I loved playing Julie McCoy from The Love Boat with the clipboard. And I was in charge of everything and ordering people around and telling them what to do. That's totally me. Like I'm a kind of a control freak. I like to be in charge of things and be really organized. And so if we go back and think about the ways that we played, there might be some treasures there that we've forgotten, right? I actually just bought a pack of Jacks because I used to love to play jacks, and I'm probably really uncoordinated. I haven't done it, but I think just even little things that are like, what did I love doing? What is the adult version of that now? Or what is the exact version of that now? Maybe it's riding your bike, but not to go to the market. Maybe it's riding your bike to just go around the block a few times with no purpose in mind. And you're just feeling the wind on your face, or, whatever. So I think chasing what lights you up and delights you might give us some good clues. And it can even just be 10 or 15 minutes. You don't have to carve out, an entire vacation. It can just be ways that we do everyday life, like you said.
Yeah, there's something about like when I query people also around play. What there is something you said 10 to 15 minutes, but with some people, what I notice is there's this element of unstructured perception. Because I think as a kid, when we're playing, it doesn't feel that structured, right? But as adults, we get so structured, and that it's hard. And so, but one of the things that's a good segue to with kids is I think one of the important points that you make is around how we can build better connection, better emotional connection through play as well. And so what's a small, simple shift parents can make even today, would you say, to build better emotional connection with their kids through play?
Yeah. So one of my favorite strategies in the book is called Bring Emotions to Life. And I want to let's nerd out on this one for a bit. Let me tell you first, the strategy is this. Okay, so let me give an example. So my son, when he was little, he loved tying ropes onto things and connecting things. So here's a play moment I remember. He tied a rope to a doorknob and then tied the other end of it to the top of a castle. And he hands me an action figure. He's got an action figure down on the castle. He hands me the action figure and he's like, "Hey mom, get this guy down onto the castle." So, I can easily go near the doorknob up at the top of the rope and hook the action figures guy's arm onto it. And I can have him kind of like zip line down onto the castle. Okay, that's great. I'm following my kid's lead. I'm joining with my presence, all of that. But what would happen if instead I would bring emotions to life and I would take that moment knowing that the brain develops, particularly the prefrontal cortex develops from repeated experiences. And I create this opportunity, this rep, shall we say, of bringing the language of emotion and an experience of emotion into the character. Okay, so here's what I do instead. So I hook the guy on there and I'm like, "I want to come down, but I've never done this before. I'm kind of nervous. I don't know if I can make it." Okay, so I'm also using another strategy in the book called Make Yourself a Mirror, where I'm using the same kind of vocal tone of voice. So I'm matching what my kid is doing, and that lets him feel seen and known and all of these things. And I'm joining.
And that's an important point to bookmark.
Yeah. So I'm like, but I'm not sure. I've never done it before. So all I'm doing is introducing an emotion that the character might feel in that moment. Now, what happens is my 4 or 5-year-old now has to come up with a solution to an emotional challenge, right? So, because he wants my guy on the castle, so he's got to come up with something. So I wait, and he says, "Okay, hold on, I'm sending a guy up to show you the way," something like that. So now what happens is my kid has now had an opportunity to hear words that go with an emotion, to also be like, yeah, when you try something new, you might feel tentative about it or not sure. And then he's come up with a relational solution of, "Oh, well, you need a buddy. You need someone to be with you. And then that'll make you feel brave enough to go." Now, all of this is very simple. It took me 5 seconds, right? But there's also some implicit things going on here too. Now my kid also has another rep around when we have emotions or things that we're thinking about or we're not sure about things, we share that with each other, right? We talk about that. That is brought out into the explicit world. And I'll just make one other, kind of draw another connection. And that is, people talk about emotional regulation all the time. You talk about it all the time too. One of my favorite ways to define what we mean when we're talking about regulation, it comes from Dan Siegel. And Dan recently, I heard him use this and I can't stop talking about it, is the idea of regulation is to monitor and modify your state. So even when I'm talking about temperature regulation, if I start noticing I'm chilly or I'm warm, I notice that, right? I'm monitoring, oh, I'm kind of warm. And then I modify, oh, I'm going to take off this blanket, or I'm going to, put on my t-shirt instead of my sweater, or whatever. So what I'm doing is monitoring and modifying. That's really what regulation is about. So when we're talking about emotional regulation, it's the ability to monitor and modify, right? And then so co-regulation would be the ability for me to monitor and modify my child's state, for example. So in this moment, what I'm doing is I'm laying the tracks for the ability to develop emotional regulation, because I'm helping it monitor, like, oh, I'm feeling nervous. I'm not sure what to do about that. What could I do? Then my kid comes in with the modify. So it's so simple, but it is incredibly powerful. We're not just, and fun should be fun for the sake of fun. And everything doesn't have to be didactic, but this is
Uh-huh.
powerful stuff.
Now, one thing I'm picking up from this, which is important, is and let me know if I'm wrong. So, in this way of play, when we're playing with our playing with our kids in this way, um, you're 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 giving the child an opportunity to come up with the regulation idea. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, what's happening is, okay, so play is so fun for kids, right? That they want to
Hmm.
stay in play, which is one of the reasons it helps really expand their, and here's another Dan Siegel phrase, their window of tolerance, right? Like they
Yeah.
might get frustrated. I'm not doing it the way they want me to, or their brother isn't cooperating and doesn't want to be the hot dog guy at the Dodger Stadium, but he wants him to be, right? So they may get frustrated, but because it's fun enough, their ability to tolerate the frustration is expanded because they want to stay in the play and they have to come up with creative solutions, right? So
Hmm.
my kid's goal
Hmm.
in that moment is to get this guy down to the castle because he's got a plan, right? So if I'm like, I'm not sure I want to do that, he's got to come up with a solution to get them there. So he's got to modify, sort of, he's got to co-regulate with my character, right? So it's really about him having to come up with solutions to emotional problems. So just like if I were, if I refuse to do something, or I say I don't want to play that way, he's got to find a way to convince me, right? So it gives them emotional and relational agility practice.
I love that. I love, and that's what I'm hearing. It's almost like, if we kind of expand this to the field of neuroplasticity, and we know that, during those years, so through the lifespan, our brain can make shifts and changes, but those years are so fundamental. And what you're doing is you're creating this ability for it to stretch and even have the experience. And what I'm noticing is have the experience in, like, I can think of and create healthy regulatory things. I mean, I'm experiencing it through play right now because it creates an atmosphere that keeps me motivated and interested and creative.
Yeah.
And I can do this. And you're creating the scaffolding. The play is sort of like scaffolding
Yes.
to some degree, to be able to facilitate those strengths, and that supports greater resilience implicitly. That's what I'm.
Absolutely. It is. It's resilience building. And so, the example I just gave is like imaginative play and stuff. But you just use the word scaffold. And so there's a strategy in the book called Scaffold and
Mhm.
Stretch. And it's really what you were just talking about. And I think it's such an important one to bring up for those of us who have older kids, right? So obviously we want to play throughout the lifespan, right? But, my the kid who was doing all that castle stuff, he's 24 now, right? So we're not doing that anymore. But how do we then do this? Now let's just take a sidestep for just 1 second away from play, and then I'll come back to this. One of the ways, obviously my whole career has been around parenting and mental health and attachment science and all of that. And as people look at the way of play, they're going to see tons of stuff that harkens back to the whole brain child and no drama discipline and many of my other books that I've written with Dan. But what I see in parenting in the last, for sure, 10 years, maybe a little longer, and you probably identify with this or know parents, and I certainly identify with this, we definitely see kids in our country. I'll just talk about our country because it's obviously, this would apply lots of places, but I just want to be thoughtful of sort of honoring different cultures. In our country, one of the big things that we see is what I would call a protection and function gap. What I mean by that is, unfortunately, there are many kids who don't have grown-ups who function well at all for them, and they are underprotected. They are not taken care of. They don't have grown-ups who show up for them and make sure they have even basic needs. Okay, so that's a reality that's really awful. The
Mhm.
other side of that, which is much more kind of like people that we interact with in educational and mental health settings that you and I are in, are often where parents overprotect and overfunction for our kids. Okay. So, for example, your little kid comes up to you and they can't get, do you remember how hard it is to get a lid off of a Play-Doh container? It's really hard. It's really hard to get the container
I'm trying to remember back
open.
to those times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like there's almost like a little, like it's just hard. It's really hard, right? So your little kid comes to you and says, "I can't get this open." Now, it's easy to just take the top off, right? Or, your kid then maybe in middle school is like, I didn't get my work done in time. Can you email my teacher and tell them I'm not feeling well? Or you just are like, okay, well, don't worry. I'm going to email your teacher or I'm going to do the project for you or whatever. Like, so we step in and we fix. And then when they're in high school and even college, we still see this in lots of ways. And I'll just say, if you want to really get a disturbing and hilarious glimpse into this in a deep way, go to any college parent page on Facebook. Pick any college, go to the parent Facebook page and read the parent comments, which are crazy. Like, parents who are like, how do I make sure that I'm copied on all email from my kid's professors so that I know what's going on, right? Like, and that's not even the craziest. That's just
no wonder we're overwhelmed.
Exactly, right? So it's not good for us either. But we overfunction, we overprotect, and that gives our kids the message like, I don't think you can handle this, right? And so then that makes our kids more anxious, and then because they're anxious, we function even more, and it becomes this cycle. So scaffold and stretch strategy is not just, it's for sure scaffolding and supporting and stretching emotional regulation, but it's all kinds of other skills too. So your kid comes to you, can't get the Play-Doh lid off. Your middle schooler hasn't done a project. You take over and you do the project. Your high schooler is like, I didn't order the corsage for the dance and it's tonight. Like, what do I do? Right. And so you're like, let me call every florist in town and see who can do it. Right. Okay. Sometimes we want to step in and help our kids like that. But lots of times what we can do instead is think about where they are developmentally and then provide the tools to do it instead of just fixing. So for example, we might say to the Play-Doh kid, like, oh, this is really hard to get open. Do you have any ideas? Or if they're even younger, you can say, here are 3 tools. Which one of these do you think might be most helpful? Right? So what we're doing is we're scaffolding them solving the problem. My favorite phrase of all ages, including my 24-year-old, is, what's your plan? That communicates. It reminds me that it's not my job to fix it. It lets them know that I trust that they can do it and I'm a sounding board. So I think the idea of scaffolding and stretch, we can do this in play. A kid's building a fort and you're like, wow, the ceiling's getting really high. It's looking like it's collapsing. What are you going to do? So I think we can do this throughout, even especially our teenagers, like, what's your plan? Or do you have any ideas for how to solve this, instead of just taking over and fixing it?
Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick break to check in and talk about a program that's very important to me. I've been working with people for over 20 years, and in that time, what I've realized is that uncovering emotional healing, strengthening emotional health, and building resilience works best when we're learning practical skills that are evidence-based, supported by a caring community, and have access to daily guidance and support. That's why I built my emotional health coaching program. If you're someone who's ready to take your emotional health to the next level, you're tired of yo-yoing around, you want to start really making real progress, whether it's building resilience, managing stress better, or simply feeling more balanced, you can get a free consult for the program. Just click the link in the description below to schedule your session and learn how we can support you. Now, let's get back to the episode. That's really funny that you say that, because recently in our family, my, almost 16-year-old, he wanted a job, which was like amazing.
Great.
And he wanted a job that wasn't close to where we live. I mean, not that far, but certainly close to his, not as far as from his high school, and so we said, that's great. I mean, that's incredible that you want a job. I believe in the benefit of that. Yeah. And what's your plan on getting there? Because the back and forth would be like really intense. And so, he kind of came up with some ideas, a work in progress, but I love that idea of what's your plan. Just personally for you, what was the moment for you in your life? Like where did it come from personally for you, where you decided that this way of play was so beneficial in your life with your own parenting, with you personally? Like, where did that come from?
It's funny, when I was writing The Whole Brain Child and all these other books with Dan, I had little kids. And, I would drive. I live in Pasadena, California, and Dan's study groups were on the west side of LA. And so I would go and learn about the science of interpersonal neurobiology. And I was also in a PhD program, and I was studying child rearing theory and the brain and all of this stuff. And then I would sit in LA traffic on the way home, and I would think about, how can I take what I'm learning to lay the groundwork now to wire their brains in the most integrated way and provide the most secure attachment. And so, but then I'm also like, I can't get my kid out of the effing bath, right? I can't, how do I get their shoes on? I don't want to do an effing puppet show for them to put their shoes on. Like, I don't feel very playful. I'm stressed. I'm exhausted. I have 3 kids. And so what I came to learn, though, was that when I really and the way I would do this, because I'm a doer, I always think of myself as like a hummingbird. I have a lot of stuff going on. I'm not good at relaxing because I'm just doing. This is like, I know just who I am. And I'm working on growth in that area. But with
it's a lifelong process.
Exactly. Yeah. But what I found is that when I really focused, even if it was just 10, 15 minutes, and I was really present, what happened relationally with my kid felt so good to me and to them. And then it allowed me to know my children in really deep ways that I would miss if I wasn't playing in these ways, where I just really followed their lead. And the first step in pretty much every one of our strategies in the book is observe and attune. So there's a lot of curiosity and just watching and attuning to what's happening and joining with, as opposed to like doing to. And so I found that it also made our whole family's life better, because it elicited cooperation more easily. They wanted to go along. And then it was just effective, Elisha. Like, and sometimes when we talk about play, we think about like sitting on the floor, building a fort or whatever. Lots of times the kids are just running around. You don't even really know what we're playing. It's just chaos. But what I found was that, and this is the reason we called the book The Way of Play, because it really is about, you can almost think about playful parenting as a parenting approach. It's a way of being in relationship, not just with our kids, but even with our partners, right? Playfulness is really about intimacy too. So like, for example, I would need to get my kid to get their shoes on out the door, right? And so if I could for sure have the battle of the wills, but I was too tired to come up with something really creative. Like, now I'm going to pretend to be Mary Poppins and use the British accent and, try and be their nanny or whatever, and see if I can get them to put their shoes on. Sometimes that was too much of a mental load to be really creative. But what I would find is that if I could just make up in the moment something like, and my stories were stupid, but I would be like, there were these 3 squirrels and they did something that no one thought they would ever do. And oh man, did they get in trouble. Now put your shoes on, and as soon as you get in the car, I'll tell you what happens next. Now, I don't know what's going to happen next. It's probably going to be a stinker of a story. But there's a playfulness and an excitement and an anticipation of this imaginary thing. And then they couldn't wait to get into the car. And so I found it to be incredibly effective, so much less exhausting. And then it felt good and right. And then I just felt, like I said, like I knew my children. I could join in their world in a way that helped me understand not only what they were interested in, but about their sensory preferences, and then also what they were working on and trying on. And what I mean by that is twofold. What we say in the book, what kids can't say, they can play. And so what happens is you can observe the play. We don't want to read into every single thing, right? If you have I used to give my boys like baby dolls and lots of like nurturing things, and they would try and, instead of rocking the baby or patting the baby, they would put baby's head in the door jamb and see how they could smash it.
Yeah.
So
right, exactly.
Don't overread your child's play. If I overread that, especially as a mental health professional, I'll be like, okay, there are sociopathic behaviors here. But really, when they play these things out, oftentimes you're like, oh, they're experimenting with what it feels like to kind of be in charge or to have some power here. Or maybe they're playing, and a lot of kids are playing like building fire walls and fire protected roofs and things for the kids who have experienced the fires in Los Angeles. So play often allows kids to work through what they're trying to process, or even what they're trying on developmentally. And that's an incredible opportunity to learn who they are and where they are.
What comes up for me as you're talking, and one of the things I'm teasing out here, which is this wisdom across different disciplines, where you said the first thing we do is we teach about observing. And if I look at like, what's the first rule of emotional intelligence, it's recognizing, observing. If I think about like different wisdom traditions. They're like, okay, we're talking about noticing and labeling, and so here we are. So this when something hits across different disciplines, that's something we as people, as humans,
Yeah.
wise to pay attention to. And so you're saying like observe, and then observe your kid. But then I also noticed you talking about like, well, my first thought if he was jamming that doll's head in the wall would, might be, oh my God, he's a sociopath. And but then I need to take a step back and say, well, hold on a second, maybe there's a different way to see this. So then there's the observing of ourselves,
Yep.
of our own emotions, of our own interpretations in that moment. Well, and as parents, and I'll just say this, and you know this very well because you've talked about in your story just now a little bit. We're so overwhelmed with, the world and all we have to juggle, and it's just incredible. I mean, when people are past that or don't have kids, and they look at people's lives who are, they're like, I don't know how you're doing that, even though they might have done it earlier
I don't
on,
know how
but
I
they've
did
had right. I look back, I'm like, yeah, how did I, it's crazy. So what you also I think in your work, in your book, you talk about focusing on kind of small, maybe these kind of like small shifts, these small moments to make things more manageable and doable. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because yeah, because we want we want to make this like feel like also like, hey, okay, I can. It's just this next thing. Yeah,
Yeah, I think again that goes back to the idea of a playfulness in our approach, right?
yeah,
So
I love
let's
that.
say, and I think, and this bleeds into like discipline and repair and attachment, like it's all woven together, like you said. I think about like times where I wasn't the parent I wanted to be. I yelled, or I kind of like, well, like last night, like I had a moment last night. My kid's like, I haven't heard you like yell like that in a long time. And I wasn't yelling at him. It's been a really rough month. We have a declining parent. We have all these other things going on. I was exhausted last night. I had so much work to do. It was getting late. And I had just gotten on the couch. I was cozy and warm. And our dog got sprayed by a skunk in the backyard. And I was like, and this happens semi-frequently. We live kind of near a naturey area. And I know that I have to shower. I have to like bathe her immediately. And she's 100 pounds. She's a big dog. So it's like a big
Uh,
feat to do. So I started just like, yeah, I was kind of cussing and like whatever. And so this morning,
you're
my kid,
overwhelmed.
what's that?
You're overwhelmed.
Yeah, I was just
Yeah.
like, oh, I can't believe I have to deal with this right now. I'm really not a yeller, so it was like my kid was, and he wasn't freaked out by it at all, but he was like, wow, you were kind of mad last night. And I was like, yeah, I was so mad that I had to stop and do that. So again, we give language to it. But what was fun, so now here, like I don't have a repair with him, but I still just want to, have a little moment of reconnection. And I said, do you want to make fun of me? Why don't you imitate me? Like, what did you hear last night? Right. So I'm kind of poking fun at myself. So even in the kind of repair, or times I might yell at my kid or something like that, coming back into repair to say, gosh, I didn't handle that the way I wanted to. I really wish I had done that differently. Will you forgive me? And then you can kind of make fun of yourself. You can tease yourself. You can be like, okay, do you want to act me out? Like, how ridiculous was I? And so you bring this kind of like silliness or whatever. I think that's one way to have a small moment of connection. And I think just,
Mm.
during, with my teenager, we send each other on Instagram funny dogs. We both love dogs. So we send funny dogs back and forth. That's a small moment of connection. Or I'll say to him, show me the funniest like meme or video you've seen this week. And then we're like up close to each other. We're laughing together. And, Dan Siegel talks about what emotional intimacy is really, when you peel back the layers, it's really shared attention in a moment of joining together. And now we know from hyperscanning, where we have brain imaging that looks at multiple brains and what they're doing at the same time, doing the same kind of task or in the same environment, is that we get into moments of interbrain synchrony where we are really held captive to each other's brains. And that's what can happen in these small moments of big connection. It's really about joining with our attention and our presence. And then if we can infuse some silliness or some laughter or even some irreverence, that can be a small moment of big connection.
That's something that there's a lot of good in that, to be able to hold that that I can poke fun at myself, or I can recognize like the looking back on it and saying like, I can't believe I reacted that way last night. And there might be some berating that happens for some people in that moment, and then say like, let me take a leaf from, or a page from Tina's book, and let me see if I can is there another way that I can kind of play with this? Maybe I can offer this like to my kid or my older kid or whoever, maybe my partner, and say, do you want to kind of like do something that kind of shows kind of funny how I reacted? What would you say to people who are parents or anyway? Because I can also see that happening. Like you have some experience and practice, and so that can come to you. And I can also see some parents who, when they react that way, they can get really stuck. Like they can get stuck in a shame spiral. They can get like they just can't find access to that playfulness because they feel like they maybe have now harmed their kid, or or just by the very mere presence of their reactivity, and or maybe they have a history. Maybe their parents were like that, so it's like this like, oh my god, I'm becoming like my
Yeah.
parent, because they were harmed by
Yeah.
that and or felt that way. Oh, how would you work with that?
I love this topic. I'm so glad you asked. Dan Siegel and I talk about this idea of repair pretty in depth in our book, The Power of Showing Up, because it's such a key feature of secure attachment relationships with our partners, with our children, etc. What I love about the attachment science around repair is that the research is really clear that when we mess up, as long as we make the repair, which could be a verbal apology, but it's really more about coming back into connection again, that when we do that, it's actually good for our kids that we had the rupture, that we had the mess up. And here's I have a couple things to say about this. I love telling a story. My kids give me permission to tell the story because they say that I sound ridiculous and not them. But I was playing Yahtzee with my boys. They were probably 12, 9, and 6 or something. We were playing Yahtzee and they started fighting with each other, and it started getting really unpleasant for me. They kept, picking at each other and being hyper competitive and whatever. So instead of setting the boundary and saying, boys, if you're fighting, it's not fun for me and I don't want to do this anymore. So you guys either get along or I'm not going to do it, right? I should have set a boundary early. I didn't do that. And eventually they kept arguing. And for me, I know the slippery slope into getting dysregulated and flipping my lid is biting immature sarcasm. So I said something like, oh, I'm so glad we're having family game night. What a delight you are. Something like that. So kind of biting, but they kept fighting. And eventually I ended up yelling and throwing the dice across the room. And I did not yell Yahtzee. I yelled something else. I don't remember what, but it wasn't Yahtzee. And then I immediately was like, oh my gosh. Okay, so now here's this moment. Now, my 3 kids are there. I've now been angry and reactive. I've yelled at them. I've thrown the dice across the room. So I'm no longer in control of myself. And that does not feel good to them. It's actually a violation of their felt sense of safety in that moment. Because if I'm not in control of myself, how can I make sure they're safe in the world, right? Now, that sounds terrible, but it's not. Here's why. Because my kids also know that I'm going to come make it right with them very soon. The feeling of messiness of relationship and conflict and like, oh, I don't like her right now, or I don't like this. This feels really bad. It's a temporary feeling. And they also have this huge felt sense of safety that I'm going to come make it right with them very soon. So it actually builds relational resilience. It also models for them how to repair. So I think that's really key is I've actually given them an opportunity to flex their relational resilience muscle. I have not done damage and harm. It's been helpful for them in a way, as long as I make repair, as long as we're not talking about abuse, right? But then I can easily go into the shame spiral. And the thing about that is that when we are in a shame spiral and we beat ourselves up, it actually makes us more vulnerable to flipping our lid again more easily. So the shame spiral is not helpful at all. What I encourage myself and others to do is to ask a question, which is this: what got in the way for me to be the parent I wanted to be in that moment? And sometimes the answer is, I haven't peed by myself in 3 years and I'm so tired and I haven't eaten anything and my fuse was just short. Okay, that's what it was, right? And that's human and I can let go of that. I can forgive myself. Sometimes it can be bigger things like when my kid yells, he reminds me of my dad. And I have a lot of like fear when I see him looking and sounding like my dad. It makes me feel really vulnerable. So the way I push back against that is to go into a position of power and to shut that down because I do not want to feel that vulnerability. So there may be work there to do as well, but we really want to ask that question and sit in curiosity. So we become curious about what happened for us. And when we go to curiosity, it's a protective factor against shame and against going into these more reactive states, because curiosity actually opens our brains to be more open and receptive and learn and grow. And so I think the key to post rupture shame is curiosity, and then some self-compassion, and be like, of course you have a short fuse. You've been pushing and pushing and pushing, and then to let it go.
And this is a part of parenting.
Yeah, let's do
I
it.
can think around my neighborhood right now, and of all the houses that are here, there's likely many houses where this has happened, probably even in the same night at the same time. And can I be kinder to myself right now?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can
What
even say,
what
like, use like second person. You can be like, this is what happens to parents when it gets really stressful, right? So you're kind of like you're putting yourself in a collective pool with other parents, as opposed to you being a bad person.
So there's a normalizing aspect to that which mediates the shame. What I also like about what you said was a curiosity. When you allow yourself to be curious, it's the opposite direction of the self-critical mind. It's implicitly non-judgmental. And then you can see different angles. So it encourages cognitive flexibility, which is exactly the opposite of what's happening in that
Totally.
moment. We're in the shame spiral. We're very rigid. And here's another thing that I want to just tease out from what you said, just if someone's listening and washing the dishes right now or something like that, that just to make sure you're kind of grasping that when you are in the practice of repair as a parent, so like that you can flip your lid, and if your kids know that there's like they have some history of you coming back, that creates regulation in them because they know that there's going to be some closure
Yep.
to this. It also might create some like, oh my God, okay, we're gonna have to have a conversation about this,
Yes.
with some of them, right? And so that will support their emotional health, not just first of all your emotional
Yeah.
health as a parent, but also their emotional health, because they won't get as dysregulated because they know what is around the corner. Which the title of this podcast is emotional longevity, kind of emotional health for the long run. So that will support um, more of that for the long run. And I actually have a funny story that I'll just tell for a second about this. So I was recently Facebook hacked, and so or there was an attempt anyway, and which threw my whole day.
Yeah.
And I had to like lock things down, do things, and I got really stressed about it. And then I kind of tried to walk my talk. I felt a lot of feelings that day, between shame of being so stupid that I thought that was the voice in my head, like, how could I allow this to happen? And then and sadness for being violated, and then fear of what might happen. And later on, it
Boy,
turned
all
to
the time
anger.
you're giving up.
So much time in my day, I had to do
Right.
other things.
Yeah.
And then it turned to anger, and I was picking up my son from school, who, as soon as I got, and this is my youngest son, he's about 10 years old. And I pick him up from school. As soon as I get there, he tells me how I failed again because I forgotten to bring him a snack.
Yeah.
I brought him
How
his
dare
shoe.
you?
Yeah, I brought him his shoes and stuff for this practice he had to go to, but I forgot to bring him a snack. So we stopped by. There's a Starbucks on the way. So I said, we're just going to stop by the Starbucks. We're going to get him these scones that he likes. So it's actually kind of turns into a special treat type of thing. And then there's this guy that comes behind me that slams his beans on the counter and like demands new beans from the Starbucks person, and is actually really rude to her, and trying to bully her. And so I'm feeling kind of a little frustrated and angry.
Yeah.
I'm there anyway. So I look to him and I say, you need to just really settle down. We're trying to get our thing done right now, and I just need to settle down. And so the woman, what was so funny about this is that the woman on the other end, who was the Starbucks helping out, I think she felt really supported
Yeah.
in that, because she was feeling bullied, so much so that she gave us an extra scone.
Nice.
And then I created repair, saying to the guy too, and I said, like, listen, I'm sorry if I was firm with you. He's like, no, it's okay. And I'm like, and I think what's best for all of us is if we can speak kinder to each other. I think that'll help us all move forward. So with to bring this full circle to what you were talking about, so we got in the car, and of course I asked my son, I said, oh, so what did you think about
Love
what
it.
happened there? And
Love
he
it.
goes, he said, I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to ask me about that. So we have that embedded in our family too,
Yeah.
through all of the different history you're talking about. And it really is helpful and supportive. So I
It's
just wanted to kind
huge.
of share
And
that.
Peter Fonagy talks about we know the phrase reflective function, right? And so when we reflect on ourselves, it's actually the same circuitry that allows us to tune in and reflect about our child's internal states. And when we focus in and kind of try and get in touch with our child's inner landscape, that allows us to be better at reflecting on our own. So, and really reflective function, the ability to reflect on yourself and others, is a huge, huge piece of maybe one of the most predictive parts of being able to provide secure attachment across generations. So it's so important that you did that. I love that. And yeah, my kids, kids of therapists, they're like, oh God, we got to have another reflective dialogue. Are you kidding? So we don't want to be too precious either. I think, Elisha, one other thing I'd love to just spend a minute on, knowing
Sure.
the focus of your podcast as emotional longevity, is the first strategy in the way of play is called think out loud. And it sounds really simple. It's a great one to do if you don't have a lot of cognitive bandwidth at the time. But what you're literally doing is, it's sort of like sports casting, where you're naming what you see your child doing, but it's more than that. It's actually tuning into what your child's mind is, like what they might be feeling or intending or attempting to do, wishing to do. So basically, like if your kid's building a ramp, or it looks like they're building a ramp, they've got these little blocks they're going up. You can kind of basically take what you think they're thinking and doing and make words out of it. You're bringing it into the explicit, into thinking out loud. So you might say, looks like you're building a ramp and you're making it really, really tall, something like that. Now, really simple, right? But it's so important. Again, like back to, there's so much more power underneath that, because what's happening is, like in the book, we tell the story about this little boy who loves building these ramps and towers, but his little sister keeps coming and knocking him over, and he gets really violent with her, right? So because he's like 3 or 4, he doesn't have good emotional breaks yet. So he pushes her or chokes her or does things like, because she's messing up his stuff. So bringing in this kind of a strategy, thinking out loud, where we're like, you're trying to build the blocks, right? So what happens then is he starts getting reps of having words represent internal states. And then he can tune in and be like, yeah, that's what I'm intending to do. And my mom totally understands my mind. Now I can understand my mind, and I can use my words to share my mind. So then what can happen is, over days and weeks, this little boy can say, I'm trying to build this ramp and Emma's coming too close and I'm worried she's going to push it down. Can you help her, keep her over there until I finish it? So then we start having some ability to navigate this. And this is very much connected to what Dan and I talk about in the Whole Brain Child, around not only name it to tame it, but in terms of memory integration. And so taking the implicit, the felt experiences, the emotions, the images of memory and all of these things, and make them into stories and words that we share with one another. And that is such a huge piece of longevity of our mental health, of our ability to emotionally regulate, and healthy relationships. So, and by the way, that think out loud strategy is very helpful for your partner too. A lot of the strategies in the book work in your relationship too. So I think, play is something we want to kind of harness our whole lives, including playfulness. But these small little strategies are things we would use in a therapeutic setting, but they're also things that should be done in our living rooms and cars and schools for kids, because they really are helping them get reps around building and integrating the brain that allows them to have the kind of emotional longevity that sets the stage for mental health and healthy relationships.
Yeah, and so we connect their stories, and we're finding these avenues for connections at the epicenter of well-being. I remember when Jaak Panksepp was doing reading about his studies and doing play with mice and this type of stuff, and finding that this brain-derived neurotrophic factor was created when these mice were kind of rough and tumbling and in play, and he called that brain fertilizer.
Yeah,
And
I got that. I'm glad you reminded me of that.
How that can create this kind of brain fertilizer, which is really supportive for our neuroplasticity and healthy neuroplasticity, or positive neuroplasticity, or whatever words we want to kind of use. But anyway, healthy for us and for our kids.
And, Elisha, I'm so glad you said that as fertilizer, because it also brings up a really important point. And that is the way that we learn as human beings. This is very much true for kids, but it's true for you and me as well, is the way that we best learn is by doing something ourselves. And the second best way we learn is by what is modeled or mentored for us, right? And so when we are doing all of these things that we're talking about, kids, we're sort of like showing it to them, we're modeling it, so they're starting to learn. And then when we do that, we're getting the direct practice of doing it ourselves. And then our kids then can start doing it themselves. And so this is how the brain gets wired then over time. And so I think I want to also give some hope here around this. Like, if you don't feel playful, or you don't feel like you're good at repair with your kids, or you don't feel like you're so great at kind of like observing and attuning to your own internal states or your kids' states or all the things we've talked about here, these are all learnable. And when we start practicing them and trying them once a day, and then we can do them 2 or 3 times a day, and then it becomes eventually who we are and what is automatic in terms of how our brains get wired. And it becomes a way of being in relationship and who we are, not just something we do.
I like how you said, so that's the idea of creating states, and with repetition, them turning into traits.
Yeah.
So they become kind of who we are.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciate about your message there is, like anything else, is what I'm hearing from you. Like anything else, it might seem kind of hard at first and foreign, especially if you look back and you're like, I'm just like not someone who you have an identity of like, I'm just not that playful. Or you look back on your history as a childhood and you're like, I don't remember really even playing very much. Like if you have that history. And what you're saying is, if you can kind of flex a little bit, like use some of these ideas and just kind of flex a little bit, because it's a small thing. And you can do that, a little bit here and there with some repetition. It'll start coming more natural. It'll feel a little bit more natural. It's like anything else. It's like the law of the universe, or the law of like anything. When you kind of practice and repeat something with some intention, it starts to come a little easier, and this is part of the message that I think is so valuable. Especially if play feels a little foreign, or we're just like, oh, I don't know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we almost have play paralysis sometimes.
As adults,
yeah, we just
a lot
don't
of
know
people.
how to get going. And so I got to do this amazing thing with these Nike athletes. I worked with the Nike Sport Research Lab for 2 years, supporting women marathon runners who were trying to qualify for Olympic trials. And then nights before the big races, we would actually get out Play-Doh and markers and colored pencils and coloring books. And it was amazing how much just the smell and the kind of tactile experience of playing with the Play-Doh totally settled nervous systems. So if you're feeling like you don't know where to start, literally get some Play-Doh and use it as a fidget. Start doodling, doing these kinds of things, and then really let yourself go. And if it's hard for you because you have so much mental load, set a timer on your phone for 15 minutes and say, for 15 minutes, I'm just going to follow my child's lead, and I'm just going to enjoy whatever it is that's unfolding. And I think if you can do it in a chunk like that, you can kind of hold your mental load and your stress at bay, and it'll actually help you with your stress too. But start small and start practicing, just like any other skill.
Another thing I'm just going to like underline from what you said that I think is really, because I had the experience when you were talking just now about this, setting something, like saying something, I'm just going to give myself 15 minutes to do this. I'm like, okay, I could do that. That seems doable.
Yeah.
Right. Versus like, let me come up with some play, let me figure out like, and how long, the brain can get overwhelmed with that. But you say, I'm just going to give myself 15 minutes. Like, it's like when people want to start an exercise practice or a meditation practice, and you're like, I can't do that. It's just too much. And it's like, well, can you do something for 5 minutes?
Totally.
Right. It's in some ways that kind of like tiny habit / atomic habits, like, that
totally.
kind of the wisdom from those.
One time. And then the next day you go a block and a half. And then, I think we want these successes, right? And kids are masters. So if we can just follow them and let go and really just delight in, it's like, I always this is something I used to say a long time ago. It's sort of like when you go to the zoo or someplace, or you're out in the world and you see like if you saw an animal you'd never seen before, you would be like, wow, like how do they move? Like you'd be so curious to kind of watch and learn about who they are. If sometimes we can look at our children with fresh eyes, like walk into the room and be like, I'm going to pretend like I've never seen this creature before. And I'm going to go in there and just like, it's like, oh my gosh, they're so incredible and bright and smart and fun. And we sometimes forget because we're wiping their butts and trying to get their shoes on, but if we can go in with some fresh eyes and just join in and let them bring you into that incredible, powerful world of play, it's a little bit of surrender. It's a little bit of saying, for 15 minutes, I'm going to surrender and let go and see what happens.
Or if your kids are teenagers, or there's the idea of being curious. Or I think in the relationship, if you're in your partnership, because you said you bring this in your partnership too, there's the uncovering of what's play for this other person. Like, what does that mean to them?
Totally.
And because we want to see where we can join, or where I can be curious, like you were saying, kind of be curious, that bottom up processing, that kind of coming from with fresh eyes, beginner's mind. How can I be curious about what play is for this person, so that I can do what you're talking about and move into joining and connection. This has been really valuable. There's so much for me individually, but I think also for any adults listening to this, and then also for tangible things to bring into your relationship with your kids. If there was one thing that you would want people to take away from this conversation, what do you think it would be?
I think it's the idea of being open to rediscovering a part of you that you have maybe neglected. It's obviously so good for kids, but it's so good for us too. And I feel like the parents who most feel like I can't access playfulness because I'm so stressed, I'm so anxious, I'm so busy, I'm so tired, we're the ones that need play the most. And so again, small moments of big connection, that's connection relationally, but it's also connection in our own brains. So find a way to think about what is one thing that just is fun for the sake of fun for me. And then as we start to access that and then surrender to joining with our kids in playful ways, it is transformative. It truly is.
It's like we're kind of flexing these neural pathways in some way, which then are like, okay, there's a direction I can go, and things start to become a little more apparent to you. Thank you so much, Tina. And I want to make sure that, because this is just like almost a taste of everything you have to offer in the way of play and everything else, where can people find out more about you and your resources? Share a little about that.
Yeah. So I'm on all kinds of social media. I'm not on TikTok, but
Me neither.
My favorite place to post, although it goes to the other places too, is on Instagram. And my handle there is Tina Payne Bryson. And then my website is tinabryson.com. So you can find me there. Tons and tons of free resources there. And then my interdisciplinary clinical practice that's in Pasadena and Santa Barbara is thecenterforconnection.org. And we have an incredible interdisciplinary team that is mental health, occupational therapy, neuropsych assessment, speech and language, and educational therapy. And we do all kinds of training. There's blog posts on there that our experts from various fields write. So those are some places to find me and my work.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone checks that out. And I look forward to doing this again with you sometime.
I would
Tina.
love it.
Thanks
So much more to talk about. And Elisha, I hope you and your family have a really playful weekend.
Okay. You too.
All right.
Bye for now, everyone. Bye. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I hope you found it as inspiring and thought-provoking as I did. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit like down below, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you know who could benefit from these insights. Your support helps us grow this incredible community and reach more people who need it. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to truly integrate these ideas into your life, I'd love to invite you to join me in a beautiful, supportive community that's doing this transformative work together. It's a space where you'll find guidance, connection, and the tools you need to create lasting emotional health and resilience. Check out the links in the description below to learn more. And before you go, make sure to tune into our next episode. It's one that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, emotional health isn't about just feeling good. It's about building the foundation for a longer, healthier, and more joyful life. I'll see you soon.